side-by-side of the difference between the two plan options in the Florida retirement system based upon the topical questions in the far left column. Most of these topics, well, actually probably all of them, we'll cover as part of this presentation. Feel free to interrupt with questions, or if you have comments you'd like to voice, we're open. We really want to encourage just an open dialogue and discussion on the Florida retirement system. So with that, I'll begin. The Florida retirement system was established in 1970 with the consolidation of multiple public employment plans over the years. For example, the teachers' retirement system, the judicial retirement system, and the highway patrol pension fund were all consolidated to make up the Florida retirement system. It is funded, or actually it provides retirement, disability, and survivor benefits for its members that are funded through employee and employer contributions and investment earnings. And as of July 1, 2015, actually for fiscal year July 1, 2014 through June 30, 2015, the annual employer contributions for that year were $2.9 billion, and the annual employee contributions for that year were $784 million. Social Security coverage is also required for all members of the Florida retirement system. The FRS provides two plan options. We have the investment plan and we have the pension plan. So when a member initially enrolls into the FRS, they have up to 6 months from enrollment to choose to participate in either plan. If at the end of that 6-month period they don't make an active election to participate in either plan, then that member is automatically defaulted to participate in the pension plan. I'd say approximately, I think statistics show approximately 50% of members default to the pension plan. Members also have a second election option available to them that allows them to select participation in the other plan after the initial election. So if I enroll in the Florida retirement system and I actively choose participation in the pension plan, I have one more opportunity while I'm an active enrollee in the FRS to switch to the investment plan if I would like, or vice versa, depending on which plan I initially choose or default into participation. The investment plan, which is a defined contribution plan, requires 1 year participation for vesting. It's primarily administered by the State Board of Administration, and the State Board is responsible for selecting providers and investment products for members to invest in based upon criteria established in law. Benefits in the investment plan accrue in individual member accounts that are funded by the employer and employee contributions and investment earnings in that account. And the benefits vary based upon how the member invests those contributions in their own account. The pension plan, which is the original plan of the Florida retirement system, is a defined benefit plan, and it requires 6 or 8 years to vest in the program, depending on the member's initial enrollment date in the FRS. It is administered primarily by the Division of Retirement, and the State Board of Administration invests the assets based on what we call a legal list established in law. It's criteria that the SBA has to follow when investing the money in the Florida Retirement System Trust Fund. And a 9-member investment advisory council also provides independent oversight for pension plan investments, so that we have an additional entity providing some type of oversight regarding the Florida retirement system and its investment process. As for the pension plan, as of December 31st, 2015, 82% of all active members in the Florida retirement system participate in the pension plan, with 18% total active members participating in the investment plan. As far as participants, membership in the FRS is a condition of employment for employers of the state, school boards, county governments, universities, and state colleges. Municipalities and special districts can choose to participate in the FRS, but once that choice is made, it is irrevocable. So once you sign up, you're not getting out of the FRS. As far as employer participation,
Can I ask a question about?
yes.
So you said once you accept to go into FRS, you can't get out of it. But if you've rejected it and you have a city pension plan yourselves, you could still opt into it at any point.
There is a process that cities must follow if they want to choose to participate in the FRS. You know, if they've initially decided not to and they want to have their own plan, and then down the road they decide that they want to join the FRS, there is a process that's established, I think, in the administrative code, and Alex can share with you that process.
So a municipality, for instance, would submit a request to DMS to enter the FRS. And the governing body would pass an ordinance or a resolution kind of outlining the intent to join the FRS. They would enter an agreement with DMS, basically providing that they'll pay the employer and employee contributions that are required. And then the governing body has to hold a referendum with the members of the current retirement plan. And in order for a member to go into the FRS, they have to approve that. So if somebody doesn't want to go into the FRS, they can stay in the current plan. Any employee who is hired after the entity enters the FRS is a compulsory member of the FRS.
So they take you said when you said referendum, and then you said members of the plan. The referendums for the voters get to vote on that, or
it's the members of the current retirement plan.
Okay.
So they would only go into the FRS if they okay that, the individual member.
So if the city chooses to participate in the FRS and all the steps are followed, members who are in the current plan can choose to stay in the current plan, but new enrollees have to participate in the FRS. I know, for example, when the teacher retirement system was consolidated into the FRS, there were a number of teachers who opted to remain in what we refer to as the TRS, the teachers retirement system, and others chose to go with the FRS. So I think we still have a few retirees out there from the teachers retirement system who are still receiving pension benefits from that old system that no longer exists. I don't want to say that because I do know that negotiations still take place at the local level. There's been some case law on that, but I don't want to give the answer without going back and reviewing the case law.
Still have the opportunity if they want to help the employer or cover the employee contribution or things like that. They can still do on their own.
But they can never get back. They can never get out of FRS.
No, once they're in that, they're in that. Yes.
Right. As far as the makeup of the membership by employer, the largest employer that makes up the FRS, school districts, followed by counties and then the state. So those are our top 3 employer participants in the Florida retirement system. The Florida retirement system is composed of 5 different classes of participants. We have the regular class, which is made up of those employees who don't fall within one of the other 4 classes. We have the special risk class that's primarily made up of your first responders, firefighters, police officers, certain employees who meet criteria established in law. And then your special risk administrative support class is made up of those special risk class members who have been transferred or reassigned to an administrative support position by their employer. The elected officers class, which is pretty much self-explanatory, and then you have your senior management service class, which is made up of senior management employees. Special risk class tends to get the most attention because of the benefit structure for that class. They also reach normal retirement after completing 25 or 30 years of service or attaining age 55 or 60, depending on when the member initially enrolled in the FRS. And that's because the special risk employee is often viewed as someone who can't perform that job after a certain number of years because of the physical demands of the job. A lot of times I think that different ones get the name special risk confused with, that must mean it's a high risk job, so they get a I guess, a improved benefit in some, that's how some people view it, but it's really because they can't perform that task beyond a certain number of years or a certain age.
Where do the judicials come into that?
The judges are in the elected officers class, and I'll have to double check, but I think state attorneys are probably in senior management. I'll double check that for you. The
State attorneys are
this elected, but the attorneys that work for the state attorneys are the senior management.
What are the judges' percentage at?
The judges are at 3.3, correct, Gus?
3.33.
3.3, whereas the other elected officers are at 3%. I think special risk is at 3% as well, so.
The judges have higher than the firefighters.
No, you're fine.
When you get to a point, you don't have to do it now, but I'd like for you to walk us through the calculations on that second, you get a second choice. If you were in the pension plan and you want to move it to investment, how those calculations come in, or vice versa. You're in the investment and you want to move to, how do you calculate what is owed, what is, because if you're not in the investment plan early on, but you switch over to investment, how do you know what your investment plan would have done for all those years? So you don't have to do it now.
Well, since you've asked the question, I know that if you are looking at utilizing your second election option, you normally contact the Division of Retirement, and they will collect all of the information that they need to run calculations on switching from either the investment plan to the pension plan, or I believe there's a formula for a pension plan to the investment
They
plan.
go both ways. Yeah.
I don't know the specific formula. We can see if there are factors that are included in that calculation, and we can get those for you, Representative. I do know that the calculation for transferring from the investment plan to the pension plan will vary depending upon what's actually accrued in your investment plan account, because the division has to figure out, if you had been in the pension plan the entire time, what is needed to cover the actuarial soundness of your benefit transferring from one to the other.
But every one of those is done on an individual basis because everybody's
Yes.
very different in their own time and stuff.
Correct.
The age and the salary, all those factors will vary. It's an actuarial calculation. It's an actuarial neutral. It's a cost neutral calculation to the FRS when you switch.
And if you don't have enough money, for example, if you're in the investment plan and you want to switch to the pension plan, based on that actuarial calculation that's generated by the Division of Retirement, if you don't have enough to cover it, you would have to come up with the additional amount to cover the transfer if you want to follow through with it. And the division can generate those letters for you. And they normally, I think the amount is good for up to 30 days to give you the opportunity to transfer one way or the other. In the pension plan, you're not going to fork over any money to transfer to the investment plan. And transferring from the investment plan to the pension plan, you might not have to either. It just depends on how your investments have done, other factors like age, years of service, and what class you're in. So it varies from member to member.
Okay, they mentioned the 3% for the elected, 3.3 is for judges. Is 3% times the number of years at the highest salary, or how do they figure the calculation on that?
For your pension plan benefit?
Yes.
Okay, so for the pension plan benefit, the formula is years of service times your service accrual rate times your average final compensation. The service accrual rate would be like the 3%, and the average final compensation, depending upon when you enter the Florida retirement system, will either be your 5 highest average salary years or your 8 highest average salary years.
It changed.
2011. Yes, for anyone enrolled in the FRS for the first time on or after July 1, 2011. So anyone enrolled up to June 30, 2011, it would be high five.
I don't
So
have
for
answer that one
example, let me see if I,
either. Back of the bill.
Oh, I do.
if you look at the side by side, what is the plan benefit? I believe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 line down under pension plan. We have the formula, and then we have an example, and this would be representative of a regular class member enrolled who has served 30 years, enrolled in the regular class, so 1.6% accrual rate, with an average final compensation of $40,000, then that person's annual benefit on average would be about $19,000.
I guess my question was more around the average final compensation. How do you determine that? Because I think it was as high as 5 is what I was.
Mm-hmm. High five, and then on or after July 1, 2011, a new enrollee is high 8.
And that's for
So
all
that's,
classes.
Yes.
and that's what has created some issues in some, especially in local governments, because just before retirement, they keep bumping them up to a higher salary range so that they could collect more retirement.
With the bonuses and
Put them in a higher earnings.
But it still averages over those 8 years. So you could have a high
It doesn't
8 and a
matter,
low
it
7.
was 5.
What's that?
It was 5.
Right, and that's why they went to 8, to try and limit some of that, I think, to try and, amortize it over an amount of time. That it could potentially lower it.
So if in the defined benefit package,
mm-hmm.
the governing body or the governing agency, I should say, whether it's a county or a teachers union or whatever, they're paying into the retirement fund at the person's current salary level.
Yes.
So then at the end of 30 years, if they started off at $10,000 a year, they were paying whatever the percentage is, 1.6. So that goes into the fund and accrues, hopefully getting investment monies added to that. But then at the end of 30 years, they're getting your top 8 rather than an average of their 30 years.
Correct.
Now, if someone at the end of their career gets a big promotion for 6 months, does that factor in as to the high 5 or the high 8, whichever it may be, or do they have to be in that position for 8 months or 10 months for it to be included in the
No.
calculation?
If that 6-month promotion triggers an increase in the annual salary, to bump that annual salary into the high 5 or high 8, then it would be included in the calculation.
So even if it's 3 months, it doesn't matter. There's no specific length of time.
Correct. Whatever the highest 5 salary years.
Prior to 2011.
Yes, and after that,
2011, highest 8.
yes.
And what if you didn't serve, like, let's say you served in this seat for 8 years and you were a county commissioner for a year and a half? Does that year and a half figure in, or just the one full year? I'm curious how partial years are, how they're calculated.
I'll have to get back with you on that one. I'm not sure how the partial year is calculated. I'll need to reach out to the Division of Retirement and just double check that.
But I would still get the final 8 years, so they would probably start from the day you retired and go back.
Yeah, well,
All the way back to your first day of employment.
well, for instance, like if
Final
you,
5 or final 8, depending on when you get into the system.
Can't go back past 5 years. Can't go back past 8 years.
it's not
If
necessarily
any.
a final.
It's your highest.
Yeah.
You
Right.
could have separation of service 12 times, but as long as you had 30 years, it would be your highest 5 years.
30 of the
Well,
whole.
if you were here that long, it would be, it started prior to 2011, so it'd be the highest over 5 years. No matter what your
Yes.
separation
Yes.
of service would be, correct?
And I'm just curious, not just about the high 5 or the high 8, but if you served 8 years, or if you served 8.5 years, are you are you credited for 8 years, or are you credited for 9 years?
So what's the average of those 8 years? So even if you're making $29.
No, I'm not talking about the average salary. I just mean, were you vested for 8 years or or for 9 years? If you only serve a half a year.
8.5. They
They prorate it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, never mind, see, there you go.
Love it when the budget guys sound.
I know. Gus is always our lifeline when it comes to the numbers.
Just gotta come off that deck chair.
They don't think there's any role or half numbers that have that.
This is probably a question that may be out of order, but is there a policy reason why we don't take the combined earnings over that 30-year period and divide by 30 and say that's your pension versus either 5 years or 8 years? Is there a reason for that?
The law would have to be changed to create that 30-year average. I know that I think in the last decade there might have been one bill filed that I think tried to accomplish that. But we don't tend to see.
Because it would seem to me that if you sign up for the investment plan and you're putting away 3% of your salary that you earned that year into the investment plan, and the governing body is putting in whatever that percentage is, it is based on that salary, and at the end of your 30 years, you're getting whatever you put in plus the investments, and that's your plan. Where it seems like with the defined pension plan, you're getting more because you're guaranteed that money over the highest 5 or highest 8. Am I reading that correctly?
You could get more in the investment plan if you invest.
With one exception. And this is where I always struggle with telling people whether they need to be in the pension or the investment. If you're retired and you collect on the pension plan and you pass away in 6 months or a year later, you've got really nothing out of it. But if you're in the investment plan, all of that investment that goes to you or your heirs is part of your goals. And that's the real dilemma.
But if you're in the defined pension plan, your spouse or whatever, the pension doesn't follow them?
If you select a
If you select that option,
beneficiary
right,
when
yeah.
you retire, then it could go to your spouse.
Correct.
But prior to that, prior to retirement, you get nothing. If you don't retire and take one
Right.
of those options in the pension plan, your spouse gets nothing.
Right.
If you're in the investment plan and you pass away anytime in it or after, the other alternative, as I consider, is the investment aspect means that I have to be somewhat savvy with my money and make good, sound investments on my own to make sure that I have an income post-retirement. Whereas the pension plan, I'm assuming someone else is assuming the risk for me to make sure that this plan is sound and I have a pension and I have to live off of that after 25 or 30 years.
Don't they still have to be qualified plans to be in an investment plan?
They have to meet certain requirements. The State Board of Administration is tasked with approving the different investment options based upon requirements set in law, and I think based upon criteria by the Investment Advisory Council. Is that right, Gus?
And that's for the investment plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But mostly, generally speaking, the investment plans are going to mimic or mirror the general economy, wouldn't they?
The investment options?
Yeah, right. Or at the very least, sectors.
They offer a variety of options. Some of them are kind of designed to age-based mutual funds. So they have a number of options. They actually, one of the options is you can invest it yourself in whatever you want, and you can select the product. But they have a variety of mutual funds that are offered to the general public.
Investment packages, if you want to select an aggressive investment portfolio that's already pre-planned, a moderate investment portfolio, a low-risk investment portfolio that the State Board of Administration helps design. If you don't want to put forth the effort to learn about the different investment options, you can select one of those investment
What's the
options.
average rate of return on the assets for the pension? On the assets.
It depends on what period of time you're looking at.
Go the longer period of time.
Longer
so
period of
20
time,
years,
it's
30
close
year
to
horizon.
7.2%. If you go back to 30 years, somewhere in that range, we can be getting a more specific number, but it's about in there.
And short term, obviously, it's going to fluctuate.
It's taken a beating the last few years. Yeah.
Over the last 5 years, it's been still in the positive. This last year, it hasn't been.
Last year was like 0.6%, 0.6%.
barely.
The year before that was around 3.2. The 2 years prior to that, it was over 10%.
Right,
So it's
in
averaged around
5 years, it's still been very good.
about 6%.
1 year, it hasn't been.
About 6%.
So it does vary.
So my point is, historically, the S&P 500 covers right around double digits over 30 years.
The retirement fund hasn't returned that much.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the S&P 500. I'm
Yeah.
talking about market indicators. So that's returned roughly double digits. So to a certain degree, if you did an investment plan that mimicked the S&P 500 and roll the assets over into that, the pension plan technically underperforms as compared to the general economy.
But I think, because they have certain requirements they have to have a certain amount of money in cash to pay the benefits. So that's not going to return much money. They also have bonds, so they do invest very
So it'll
conservative.
be discounted.
Yeah, it'll be conservative. They invest in conservative. I think again they have to be prudent by statute to invest, but I think they are generally going to be much more conservative than it's wide open. Back when the market dipped in 2009, they went down about 18-19%. If they were in mutual funds, they could have gone down, or with the stock market index, they could have dropped 45 or 50%. So they try to moderate the risk and swaying back and forth.
But that's also one of the biggest arguments against an investment plan, because if you want to retire in one of those down years when the market takes a shellacking and your assets degrade, albeit on a short period of time, because the market always bounces back, then you're sort of at a handcuff at that point, right?
Yeah, you could be on timing, and I guess it's one of the things you guys have talked about, the investment strategy. You probably become less aggressive as you get closer to retirement. You may be more conservative.
Prudent investing would tell you that should be the case.
But it's kind of tough when you're 60 and you may live to 90. You can't be too conservative, or you won't be able to cover that as well.
But also the investment plan, you can pull a private investment plan. You can pull the money out anytime you want. You don't have to wait until you're vested, which is another big, I guess, plus for an investment plan over a pension plan.
You have a year vesting on that.
Yeah, it's not a handcuff. You can do whatever you want with it.
I shouldn't advise on investment strategy. If you look at my 401k.
So I think we covered the topic of what the investment plan benefit would be once you retire, and how we calculate the pension plan benefit. Just to give you a heads up, there are disability benefits that are provided to both the pension plan and the investment plan. A member is eligible for in-line of duty disability from day one in both plans, whereas a member is eligible for non-duty disability after 8 years of service. So, for example, an in-line of duty disability benefit for a special risk class member would be 65% of the average monthly compensation, and for all other classes, it would be 42% of the average monthly compensation. For non-duty disability retirement, all classes would qualify for 25% of the average monthly compensation. For purposes of the investment plan member who's disabled in the line of duty or non-duty disability, they can take the distribution from their investment plan account, or the member can choose to apply for the disability benefit under the Florida Retirement System pension plan. And if the member is approved, then the member is transferred to the pension plan along with the entire investment plan account balance in order to help fund that disability benefit through the pension plan. Survivor benefits are also offered. We had big changes to the survivor benefit package during the 2016 legislative session. The in-line of duty death benefit for special risk class members in the pension plan was increased from 50% of salary to 100% of salary at time of death. The investment plan, many argued, didn't have a death benefit, although some would say that when that member died, whether in the line of duty or not, the balance of the member's account, if vested, was the death benefit. However, during the 2016 session, the legislature did establish an in-line of duty death benefit for special risk class members in the investment plan that mirrors the pension plan benefit. So it provides 100% of salary at time of death for those special risk class members. In addition, the special risk class member death benefit, if there is no surviving spouse, the benefit is paid to the dependent child till the child reaches the age of 18. With the changes during the 2016 session, that benefit can be extended to age 25 if the dependent child is unmarried and I believe in college. For all other members of the FRS pension plan, the in-line of duty death benefit stays at 50% of salary at time of death, and the dependent benefit is only until age 18. There's no extension to age of 25. If a member is not vested in either plan at the time of death for a non-duty death, then the beneficiary is only entitled to the employee's contributions at time of death.
Just the contributions, not the contribution plus investment.
Correct, just the employee contribution.
Or the employer contribution.
No employer contribution. Yep.
Only the 3 or 1.6%, both all 3%.
3%. Yes. In the pension plan, we also have a deferred retirement option program that's available. It allows the member to retire and continue working for up to 5 years or 8 years if you're K-12 instructional personnel. However, the K-12 instructional personnel can only extend those 3 additional years upon approval by their supervisor. So it's not an automatic extension to work an additional 8 years. They have to get approval, I think, annually for that extension up to 3 years. On or after July 1, 2011, the drop benefit is calculated. The pension check goes into an interest-bearing account that's compounded 1.3% monthly. And then once the person completes drop, they receive a check. Mm-hmm. Yes, so if you enter drop on or after July 1, 2011, you officially retire from the Florida retirement system when you enter drop. So instead of receiving your monthly pension check, you're going to continue working, and your monthly pension check will be placed in an interest-bearing account, and it will compound monthly at 1.3% interest. Prior to July 1, 2011, it was 6.5%. No, it was just a straight up 6.5% interest. Mm-hmm. Correct.
So they receive that one-time check, as you said, cash, but they still, in retirement, they still get their retirement monthly retirement plan.
So let's say you enter drop on or after July 1, 2011, and you work the full 5 years. When you hit the end of that 5 years, you have to separate from employment in order to receive that drop payout, and I guess technically retire again, for lack of a better description of the word. And you will then begin receiving your monthly pension check instead of it being placed in an interest-bearing account.
And how long before they can actually come back to work and be an employee?
So a person could come back to work after 6 months of being retired, but if they come back in month 7 through 12 of retirement, they cannot continue receiving that pension check until month 13. The pension check is basically frozen. If they wait until month 13 to return to work with an FRS covered employer, this is all going back to work for an FRS covered employer, then they can collect a salary and continue to receive the pension check. But they cannot begin to accrue a second pension, because that was part of, correct, that was part of the double dipping legislation that passed in 2009 and took effect July 1, 2010. In that same note, if you're an investment plan participant and you separate from employment with an FRS employer and you take a distribution from your investment plan account, you are deemed retired. And if you try to come back to work with an FRS employer, you cannot enter the FRS again. So there are some former FRS investment plan participants who separated from FRS employment prior to the changes to the double dipping scenario in July 1, 2010. And when they have tried to return to work, they no longer have the benefit of a pension. So I know that that's something that the legislature has looked at addressing the past couple of years. There have been FRS proposals to allow those investment plan retirees to come back into the investment plan account, because in some scenarios they might have only worked 3 or 4 years and they might be late 20s, early 30s, and can no longer accrue a retirement benefit.
But if you have an employee, a state employee, for instance, that worked for the state for 3 years or so, and he's in the investment plan, and he leaves and takes a private sector job, he doesn't have to cash out and pull out his investment, right? He can leave it in there.
Correct. You can leave it in the investment plan account, because if you take it, then you are deemed retired, but you can leave it there. And then when you return, if you return to work with an FRS employer, the investments just start going back into the account again.
Okay. Is elected officials qualified to do the drop program? Why are we? I've never heard of an elected official being in the drop program. But couldn't you actually want to do that?
You could.
What is there something for prevent you from doing that?
Municipalities have a full retirement system.
do it all the time.
They're elected in municipalities, and
We have some cities without term limits.
they enter the drop program.
They could.
I think that's what tax collectors and superintendents do it.
Judges.
Never heard of an elected official do that. So why couldn't we do it?
Come
As
from
elected
Charlotte County.
house member.
Well, if you had separation or if you went back and forth from the House and Senate enough, I guess you could, but term limits wouldn't allow you to do it additionally. But if you did 8 here and 8 there and 8 here and 8, you could do it. Because no matter what, it's years of service. You have to hit 30 years of service. So you have to do enough terms in either house
Back
to
and forth.
accrue 30
Well,
years
you don't
worth
have
of
to do
service.
30 years in the one position. You could be House, Senate, you could be
You
a
could go to
state
county
employee.
commissioner, you could go to
Right,
city councilman,
right.
you could get, as long as you have 30 years of service in the Florida retirement system.
You can go enter drop before you have 30 years as long as you hit the age.
Yes, age.
But you may only have 4 or 5 years of service, and it may not be, it may
Well,
not
there
be
you go.
worth
If you got hired, if you got elected at age 50, you could do 2 years in the Florida retirement system and go in the drop for the next 6. Well, 5 out of you do. As long as you're 52, right?
57.
No.
3 years of service. 57 to go in, I
Okay.
believe.
So if you get
I
hired,
may be wrong on that, but it's a certain age. I think it's 57.
I think you're right, Gus.
But I've never heard of an elected official being in the drop program, so it's kind of new for me. But you say in municipalities.
A lot of the state attorneys, public defenders have been in, judges. I think there was only one legislature that was in it in the last few years.
My last opponent did it.
Is that right? I guess I don't think of judges as being elected officials, but some of them are.
And I think there's, and I'm not sure exactly how the structure of the law, but if your 5 years is up before the term is up, you can continue working till the end of your term. You just don't accumulate any more drop or interest on the drop account. So they don't just boot you out of office.
Just to leave you with some statistics real quick. Leave on a high note. No, real quick. Annually, there is an actuarial valuation performed on the pension plan. And as of July 1, 2015, the funding ratio was at 86.5%, and the unfunded actuarial liability was $22 billion for the FRS pension plan.
Rate of return on that?
I'd have to go pull the valuation report and look.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What were they using as a rate of return on that?
Was
The
that
assumption is 7.65%. Talking about for the pension assets.
Correct.
Yeah, 7.65%. They just lowered that in the assumptions conference in October to 7.6%.
So is that done by law, or is that done by a commission that looks at, how do they come to that number?
It's an assumptions conference. They have a staff person in the House, Senate. It's an estimating conference, but they call it an assumptions conference. So the economic experts in the Senate, they have one representative from the Senate, the House, the governor's office, and the EDR, that group, Amy Baker, and they all meet and they make that assumption every year. They look at it every year. And it's been lowering over the last few years. They've been dropping it incrementally.
Can you tell our newcomers how much in general revenue we had to infuse in it last year just to keep it stable? 2.9 billion.
Oh, no, those were the employer contributions in general.
Revenue,
Yes.
we actually had to, I think it was, do you remember 53 million or something like that?
Yeah, the last few years that you guys had to appropriate money to fund the UAL has gone up. It's going to go up again. This year there'll be somewhere $50 to $80 million of GR. Because of the mainly because of the returns were
infused into the retirement system to keep it at that comparable.
A quick question. So, I mean, if we come up with the 7.60, the estimating board, or whatever it is, that is basically, they're going off a historical and what they think is going to return, correct?
Yeah, there is kind of a number of factors they look at, and there was some contention this year in the conference. There were some disagreements on whether to lower it or not, so they kind of compromised and lowered it a bit. They're looking at historical and then future, what they're predicting in the future as well, what they think the market will do, and also there is some budget consideration. They don't want to go up and down every year. They want to keep it gradual, so the cities and state doesn't get hit with a big charge one year and then nothing the next year. So they gradually do that, but it's basically their expert opinion on what the market will do over the next 30 years. So it's a very long-term estimate. It's not a one-year thing. It's going over 30, 35 years.
So the unfunded liability was 22 billion. Is that what it is?
That was as of July 1, 2015. We should have the updated numbers later this month because the actuarial study for the upcoming year is due in December of this
All
year.
right, so my question about the unfunded liability number, is that Horizon? Is that Infinite Horizon? I mean, do we know? I mean, how far out is that? I mean, the reason why I ask, I don't even know if you do that. The federal government does it Horizon and Infinite Horizon. Horizon is everybody who's in there right now. Infinite Horizon is, by the time you go 30 years out, there's still people going in over the 30 years. So Infinite Horizon is usually out 100 years. Do we have that number?
Well, I guess when they calculate the liabilities, obviously the actuarial, the assets, they know the number. They know what the investment are. The actuarial liability part of it, they're looking at the fund. They're projecting on everybody who's in there now, me, you guys, what will our benefits be? And how much money do they have to have invested now? But what the future estimate of what payments will be. And they estimate, say, $170 billion is the liability. I'm just numbers
That's
are
future
close.
assets, and they go over the debt.
And they say, they have the average, and they do a 5-year smoothing of the assets, and so maybe 150 billion in assets now, and they're projecting, we really need 170 billion now to be fully funded to cover all those future payments.
So it was 170 billion. So it's a $25 billion shortfall. So that would be a Horizon number. So then I just have a question, just holistically, and just trying to understand this. So if our assets now are our assets, and it's the amount of money that's gone into the payment, whether it be employer, whether it match, or whatever it is, and historically we are returning roughly about 7.5%, and if 7.5% is historic, and that's pretty much happening. Let's just make the assumption that that happens every year like clockwork. It doesn't, but we know it smooths out over time. How can we technically have a shortfall? Now I'm just thinking like P&Ls and balance sheets in my head. how can we technically have a shortfall unless there's a funding formula mechanism problem, not necessarily an asset growth and return problem? I mean, does it point to a funding formula problem?
My opinion would be no, it really doesn't. As long as you hit your assumptions, you'll never get a UAL, like you say. But for when the retirement fund built up a big surplus, probably $18 billion surplus right before the crash. The legislature elected to use a lot of that or a portion of that surplus for extra benefits for special risk. They also used it to offset, a great deal of it to offset employer contributions. So for a number of years, all the employers were contributing much less than they needed to. So that ate up a good chunk of that surplus. So until about 2009, we had 12 years when it was in surplus. Then when the market dropped 18, 20%, or the retirement fund dropped that, then it dropped another 7%, that created the UAL. And it was about $21 billion 8-9 years ago. It's gone up a little bit each year since. It hasn't gone up that much, but it's gone up to another $4 or $5 billion. And a lot of that's gone up because returns have been a little bit lower than the 7.6% expected. And there's also been a couple fairly large adjustments to the retirement system. There was a big error, $2 billion error that they found in their assumptions, and they've addressed that. And then when they lowered the assumption to 7.60, that increases it as well. That generates a UAL. So as long as they're hitting the assumptions, you're right. They would be boom, dead nuts on. But like I said, they used a chunk of it, and just the timing of all the UAL stuff. Even though you may hit it over long term, you may have had a year where, say, if you drop 20% one year and go back 20%, you're really not to zero. You get down 20, but then so there's some of that in there as well.
So that would be the difference between just the present and future value of money at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
I have a question on something that is like probably a minute fraction of the population, but just because I have a constituent, a school teacher who ran for office and was elected, and then her drop ran out and she had to retire. But there was, I mean, how does that affect her, I guess, her disbursement? I don't know. I mean, how is that going to affect her?
I think if she ended her 5 years and she's in the middle of her term, the 5 years ended, like she was elected and then her drop ran out in the middle of her term. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think she was not able to get her benefits because she was still employed by the state, even though she had retired from the school system. And see, I think that's her issue. Is she wants to get her retirement benefits, but because she's an elected school board member, she's still, I guess, technically an employee of the state with her elected term.